Hello and welcome back. I'm Kyle Smith and I'm sitting here with Allan R. Scott, our music director of the Southeastern Pennsylvania Symphony Orchestra, and Ricardo Morales, our special guest star for our concert today. Ricardo, Allan, great to see you.
We're thrilled, and we're thrilled to go into the second half. People are in for a real treat.
I know they will be, and I have to ask you, first of all, before we get into that, of all the symphonies that you could have paired with the Copland, now I know that the number of instruments that we have and all that works into it, but why this symphony and why this symphony of Mozart?
Well, this is Mozart's first mature symphony, the 29th, and I even tried to, hopefully it came across, that I tried to do it in a way that Mozart was looking forward, almost like Beethoven is with this third, but at the same time, one eye on the past. I don't do a lot of vibrato in there. I don't let the strings really vibrate that much, so it's a little bit more early classical. But at the same time, I'll have abrupt tempo changes, particularly subito forte, immediately strong. I don't believe in immediately soft in Mozart. Everything should taper down for the most part. And so it's very joyous, but it's aggressive in a way too. And I find myself, for even all my programming that I'm doing going forward, is that I'm having this sort of aggressiveness about taking back control of our lives. And so, like, I'm not ready to announce the season here for next season, but like in Helena Symphony, we announced Rite of Spring, Carmen, Beethoven 9, these very aggressive sort of, this is mine, reclaiming our lives. And so I felt that Mozart's 29th, there's an aggressiveness to it, but a big smile. And I wanted to end the season with a smile, this very different, difficult, empty hall season. I didn't want it to be too emotionally intense because we've had enough of that for a while. I wanted it to be, this is great fun. Just to keep going with that, the idea that I'm actually ending with the concerto and not the symphony, the old traditional format, overture, concerto, intermission, symphony. I didn't want that for this. One, I think it's hard to do something after this Copland, particularly Mozart. So our sounds are going to be different. And the Copland, even though it's shorter, has such an American energy to it that we feel that we're in this jazz era. We feel like we are also looking back towards the sounds where Copland tries to create this in naive America, the Appalachian Spring, which we started our season with. So I was kind of bookending the Coplands and this idea that we're also, the jazz is American, and also it's letting our hair down a little bit, the Roaring Twenties. Maybe we're hopefully going to go into our own Roaring Twenties of this century. And so I wanted to end with the Copland. Ricardo and I just did this piece less than 2 months ago in Helena. I started the concert with that, but here I'm ending with the Copland.
Well, I talked a little bit in the introduction about the Mozart, and especially how he juxtaposes, as a sign of his maturity, he juxtaposes these different elements, loud and soft, and different themes and how they speak to each other. But with the Copland, Ricardo, I want to ask you this. So we have the two movements. They're very disparate movements. The first one, very lyrical and this haunting sound. And of course, the jagged, syncopated second movement, separated by your short cadenza. So my big question is, do you have a favorite movement?
Yes. Well, it depends on the day. It depends on the day, for sure. I mean, the beginning for me, I'm very much into this Appalachian Spring type sound that he uses, and the gentleness and the beautiful sound. And I am very appreciative of those opportunities to sing and to be able to have a sound that it matches well with the orchestra. So it's always a give and take, so it's much more organic. So I really enjoy that very, very much. And every single time that I've played works by Copland, that style of writing, the big intervals, the beautiful harmonic clarity, that is usually my favorite part. But once you get into the jazzy part, there's no going back. So for sure, it's once you're in it, then it's very much a lot of fun and very energetic, and there's always an opportunity to do things differently. So it has that kind of freedom to it that I really enjoy very much.
Well, it sounds really difficult to me for a clarinet to do all those wide leaps in the slow part and also in the fast part. Is it? Because you make it sound like it's not difficult, but
it's always it's a challenge, but one of those challenges we take with stride, and we are just very happy to be able to play it. You know, even though it's difficult, we are always clarinetists. We're always very grateful to have great pieces to play, and so we take, you know, the fleas come with the dog.
Well, and I want to just interject on that. This idea you'll hear in the if you think of it as 2 movements or 3 movements, the middle section where it's just the clarinet, it's almost like you hear this metamorphosis change from the lyrical, innocent, naive Copland, the America before the wars, just go a little farther west, young man, and you'll surely find opportunity. You know, this gosh golly belief in this naiveness about America, something that Copland's best friend, Leonard Bernstein, did not embrace in his music, right? It was much more like West Side Story. You'll hear that transition in the cadenza, where all of a sudden the jazz starts creeping in, and you'll hear almost the bending of pitches and things like that. And maybe a clarinetist like that latter movement, because that's not something they normally get to do in orchestral music.
And Ricardo gets to basically introduce the second movement,
Yes.
and says to the orchestra, okay, now this is what we're going to do.
That's right.
And you become the conductor and bring it in.
Just for a second.
Just for a second.
What's interesting is that, with all due respect to Mr. Copland, the first movement is like, you couldn't get more perfect string writing. And then the last section, you shouldn't have strings there at all, maybe except for basses, because it's not string writing. It's like for percussion or for piano. And he uses just strings, harp, and piano, very different. And he wrote it, of course, it's hard to not talk about this. He wrote it for the legend, Benny Goodman,
Right.
who, and Ricardo and I talk about this a lot, it was almost like he was reserved when he played it. He wasn't the Benny Goodman, although and Ricardo has his theories on this, why, but you know, you can tell why.
It's only a theory.
Okay.
No, but you know, because he was.
We're just among friends.
Yeah,
No one's,
yeah,
you know.
Well, I think that he was literally instrumental in getting many pieces added to the clarinet repertoire. Not only the concerto by Copland, but Darius Milhaud dedicated his concerto to Benny, and Bartók, and a number of other composers. And the thing is that he did many recordings at Mozart concertos, Weber concertos, and things like that. So he was a big-time soloist, one of the first ones to do the crossover very effectively. But he wanted to, you know, for some reason he seemed like to want to be like legit. I'm legit, not pretty good for a jazzer or whatever. But so in a way,
that actually predates this, because he did his big jazz concert in Carnegie Hall.
Yes, that's right.
Which was a big,
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, well, he was a terrific soloist in his own right. So it's always a great thing to try to follow in his musical footsteps and be able to ride the wave of his creative spirit, etc. But yes, a lot of the performances are very perplexing, because some of the writing seems to be very open to have more jazzy elements, and in many of the performances that are out there of his, he's much more reserved. But what we would call a classical person's version of jazz, instead of a jazz artist playing some of the classical things. So it's more restrained in a way. But Copland also used to say that he loved that recording very much. And one of my former teachers teachers and many other artists who had gotten the opportunity to perform the concerto with Copland conducting, they will always be inquiring, so is this supposed to be more jazzy, this and that, and Copland would, he was a very nice gentleman. He didn't throw Benny under the bus. He was like, yeah, it could be performed that way too. so he left it very much in a gray area.
Well, my question could get very different answers depending from whom I ask this, but I'll start with Allan then, going off what you just said. Is this a concerto where the soloist can take more of a lead in how the concerto plays out as far as interpretation than other concertos because of what Ricardo
I
was
think
just
almost,
mentioning?
especially the last movement.
Yeah.
Even in the rehearsal last night, the read-through, he was doing things different than we did in Helena. Well, one, we're taking the tempo very different than we did 2 months ago. The first movement, I would say the conductor, if the soloist allows it, the conductor can ebb and flow a little bit more because we're sort of singing to each other, taking turns leading a dance.
Mm-hmm.
I think the conductor maybe, if they understand Copland, they can maybe ebb a little bit, a flow. The last movement, I really am listening to everything he's doing, and if he tries to do a little nuance, I very much feel like I'm following, but not letting the tempo fall apart either. I mean, just to make sure I'm always supportive, because I think the soloist has to feel completely free and know that the orchestra's there for them, because it's a tightrope walk, and that movement, it's difficult.
So is that a good answer?
Absolutely. Okay. I will go with the maestro.
That's a very good answer. Well, let me ask you again, Allan, you've conducted this before, and you've conducted Ricardo before. From the time you first learned this concerto, has your conception of the performance of it changed to what tonight will be?
I think the first movement, we have to seduce the audience, ideally, into really this dream world of that Appalachian Spring world of innocence and escapism, and allow them then to feel like bringing them to the jazz era, and to feel like it's okay to just be fun. All the while realizing strings should not be playing this because it's just so complicated and it's not very string-like, and so you have to make sure that the strings have permission to think like a percussionist. So yeah, you always grow with the piece, I hope. I've done it with several clarinetists, and of course I love doing it with one of the greatest living clarinetists. And so to have someone like Ricardo, who is such a giving artist, just the fact that, we'll do it this, start it, we'll just do it. You know, that's great, because then it's like, okay, we trust each other. You have to trust each other, or else it's not compelling. So.
Ricardo, did your giving nature come from the fact that so many in your family are musicians?
Oh yes,
you play together.
Yes, I know the rules. I'm the 5th out of 6. I know my rankings, so I have to keep. I have to keep humble and follow the band.
So you're one of the younger ones.
Yes,
in your family, right?
So
okay.
yes, I have 4 brothers and a sister. 2 of them are composers. 2 of them are they do conducting, and a cellist, and we have a really great time collaborating, and whenever we play together and all the things. So what I have learned is being sort of like at the bottom end is you listen. They're the ones who are getting scolded, so you try to avoid getting into that trouble with the parents, right? So I learned to be a little bit more open-minded to the different situations, and actually that also helps a lot for music making, because then it allows an opportunity to constantly learn and constantly discover, and that is one of the things that is the most important. I mean, with the Copland, or a piece that we're playing often, and then sort of like the Mozart is a concerto or a Mozart quintet. I've had opportunities when people ask, "So what tempo do you like?"
Yeah.
And then my answer is yes.
Well,
Yeah.
we are all the beneficiaries of your family's training, and we'll have to leave it there. And
there's one more quick plug that I think we need to introduce, because you're both so humble, but we have to tell the story that, and I'll tell the audience that Kyle was watching the performance that Ricky and I did in March, And within a day, I remember I was just sitting in my hot tub the next morning, and I get this message from Kyle and says, I got to write something. We did an encore in Helena with my principal bass there, and Ricardo said, you should do this, and it's for bass that Morton Gould, American composer, wrote for clarinet and bass, light, a calypso, a really chill piece, couple minutes, just such a nice little after-dinner digestivo, a little throwback shot or something, just something really nice. And you love that, or you love the performance so much, you said, can I write an encore for Ricardo? And I said, yes, and we're doing it with our pianist, Don Tenenblatt, and Ricardo.
You said, let me ask Ricardo.
And I said, let me ask Ricardo, make sure he's good. And of course, Ricardo said yes.
Of course.
So can you just talk about this piece real quick?
Oh, it's just very, very quickly. We have to go to the concert, but it's a slow, very Americana piece coming off of the mood of the Copland, and I'm looking forward to a great, beautiful sound from Ricardo. Thank you for
we're excited
letting
for
us do this. And thank you to all who are listening, and we'll see you at the next, at the Copland, and thanks for joining us.